This presentation has been broken down into 4 components, so they will overlap.
So finding ourselves at.
And the first one that we had the difficulty was history of living green infrastructure and development. So really just how urban spaces got to become how they were compared to what was here 400 years ago. And today we're looking at long-term maintenance of living green infrastructure. The focus is on trees in urban landscapes, but there's no getting around looking at the relationship of the trees to the rest of the landscape they're in. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So this first slide, clearly it's not, oh, let me get the slides show up and running correctly. Okay, Astrid, for some reason, it's not going to the slideshow.
Okay, Chris, I'm going to make you co-host, so that
Okay.
should enable it. Let me just get there. There we go, and good. That should work for you now. We're viewing your screen, so that should be live.
Okay. Still not getting into that.
Well, there's no end to technical difficulties here.
Okay. Well, hopefully this is the right one.
Hey,
are
that
we in
looks
there?
good.
Do you see that?
That looks good. That looks good.
Okay. Hopefully it's the right presentation. I have many versions of it. So anyhow, clearly that's not a picture of a beautiful garden, beautiful landscape. There's not much beautiful there. There actually is no landscape. But this is the kind of reality of the past 50 or 60 years of development. And that's my perspective I come from. It's more of a macro point of view, and it's how we can apply everything we understand about the living environment as it pertains to our gardens, but on a far larger scale, so that we can actually have a functional landscape in place that you will acquire when you buy your new home or your home that was built 40 years ago, and be able to move forward with it. So that's the perspective. So again, today we're talking about long-term maintenance of living green infrastructure. And I define living green infrastructure slightly different than green infrastructure, because green infrastructure involves a lot of hard landscape features. And we're focused on soil vegetation, the urban forests, and natural processes. Okay, so today we're talking about urban forests, and turf management is going to be a very big part of this, because in the urban environment, where do many of our trees grow? By default, it's in turf. It's not in a natural setting, and the relationship between trees and turf is very important. I like this picture because, and I can make fun of it, being an arborist, we have a bucket truck sitting on the root system of a mature tree while they are supposedly trying to improve its health. So you've seen this slide before if you saw the last presentation. It's from Dr. Elan Ingham. I really like it because it shows what's happened in the last 10,000 years since the ice sheets retreated here, at least here in Eastern Canada. 10,000 years ago, when they retreated, there was no vegetation, there was no microbes in the soil, there was nothing, there was just rock. And it was, the area was repopulated over time from the west and from the south, slowly developed vegetation and a matching soil biology. And then over 10,000 years, we got to where we were over on the right here with these very mature, somewhat climax forest systems and a very sophisticated underground community of what you might call natural helpers. This red line here kind of represents a mirror. The above ground biodiversity is basically represented in below ground. So as we move through time, the soil biology got more sophisticated, far more fungal biomass populations. What that means really is just different nutrients available throughout the ages to suit the plants. So we deforested all this 300 years ago. And in the process, we lost the soil biology. It eroded away in the wind and the rain into lower areas or into our watersheds. And our soils moved backwards successionally to somewhere here. Okay, this is just anecdotal. I don't know exactly where, but this is the reality of the soil that we had 150 years ago. We reforested, we cut that down, we went into agriculture, we took that out, and we put in our urban spaces. So we never did recover back up here where we were in the past. So the reality of an urban forest or any kind of urban landscape is we're somewhere down here as far as the functionality of the soil and what the plants can be supported. Now that's a repeat if anybody read the last one. Here's a little chart, and don't get caught up with the numbers, but from a point of view of how your neighborhood may have been developed, we like to compact everything to a very high level. This 90% or greater, it's usually 95%, what we call Proctor density method, which is just 90 or 95% of a theoretical compaction you can get to it. That allows us to build buildings, put sidewalks in, parking lots, roads, anywhere on the site. Problem is, if you look at it from a threshold for root growth, really it's way over what our plants can handle. And the sweet spot is somewhere probably down around 80%, so that there isn't going to be settling, but the plants stand a chance. This is how most development is done. It's 90, 95%. So this is a chronic problem, and it's what we've done for 60 years. So if you move into a new neighborhood, or this is actually on the left, a new neighborhood, and on the right, it's actually a restoration site. These are the conditions that are very often experienced. So this is your starting point very often. If you live in an old neighborhood, you're blessed because all of this did not take place to the same degree, and your soils and vegetation have been able to evolve over say 100 years if you're in an old neighborhood. But this is what new development looks like. Now I bring this up because I've been involved with this for 30 plus years. Tree spading. They're a great investigative tool because you get to see what's in the ground. You get to see what's down 4 feet, 5 feet in the ground. And just as an example, two recent examples, say in the last couple years in the Greater Toronto region, Astrid would get a kick out of the one on the left. This is the town of Milton. This is what we found at one site when we dug a hole to plant a tree, is the reverse of what you'd expect. We found 3 feet of topsoil buried by 18 inches of subsoil. Now you would not know that if you went to sod this and eventually plant trees, put in your garden or whatever. So these are the realities of how we develop. And on the right side here is what we call a plug. Is a tree spade dug, a tree that had been cut down to be replaced, and it dropped this what we call plug of earth on a site so it could go pick up the tree and take back. Well, if you notice, it dropped it probably from 4 feet onto the ground. It didn't break up one little bit. This is almost completely intact. The bulk density of this is probably approaching a brick in reality. And of course, the irony is we're going to put a tree right back in the site that this tree came out of. So this is what you often inherit when you move into a new home. You just don't know it. So we want to know, how do we move from what's on the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen? That's a compaction meter. Some of you may have seen it. Sometimes it's called a penetrometer, but this is a compaction meter. It's about 3 feet in height, and it measures compaction. And on this site, that compaction meter has been pushed right down to its handle. Now, we'll talk about how to go from the left to the right, but just bear in mind that there's hope and you can get to the right-hand side. So again, we're going to look at turf initially because that's where many of our urban trees grow. And you'll see, it's very hard to see, there's this little scrawny suffering, it's a white spruce, a native tree here in Ontario that's been planted here. And whoever cut the grass lovingly stayed away from it and went around and cut the grass, leaving the turf high around this little tree. Well, you can see the outcome of that. So how does that impact the tree or the turf? Well, these are the two parts. This is the same property. There's the tall grass, which is 3.5 inches tall, and there's the short grass on the left, 2 inches. We got 52 degrees Fahrenheit on this grass surface. The grass is dormant, actually dying here, and this wasn't a drought, so this is maybe a little extreme. But even the tall grass, we're up around 33 degrees Celsius. So interesting enough, soil biology kind of mimics human temperature ranges. And once we go above a certain threshold, around 40 degrees or a little bit less with humans, the soil has the same issues. And of course, mowing height is something you can choose to do. It's not something you just endure these conditions. So this is Christina Nicolic's diagram on soil respiration. Basically, all it means, or shows a lot, is as temperature rises, soil respiration, which is just the biological activity in the soil, your beneficial fungi, bacteria, and other organisms, rises up to about the 40 degree Celsius mark. Then it plummets very quickly. And when you cross that threshold, your turf goes dormant or dies, and it affects your trees because where are your tree roots? They're in there, and largely in urban areas with compacted soils, they're very close to the surface. So then your trees go into drought stress. Degrees Celsius and bacteria 20 to 35 degrees is certainly far below the level of that one picture there. And I've taken infrared temperatures on a schoolyard of the grass surface beside an asphalt walkway, and they were identical. So one of the things I always talk about if I'm talking to a homeowner, it literally is something as basic and simple as your mowing height. Your mowing height affects the synthetic capacity of the plant because you're always knocking it down. It affects the water nutrient uptake. It affects the rooting depth because you're taking energy away from its ability to root. And when you reduce the root system, you reduce the water infiltration and holding. It affects the nutrient holding capacity because it affects the soil microorganisms. Soil temperature, obviously. Soil compaction goes up as a result of having your grass too short. Soil respiration, that's just biological activity. And of course, drought tolerance by having overheated soils. And of course, your trees. Your trees are in there. So a couple things. If there's a checklist to check off things to avoid. Synthetic fertilizers. They were never intended for a sustainable landscape. They're in our landscape by default. They're actually in agriculture by default. They're byproducts of World War I and World War II munitions. A lot of the research that was done early, and many of you would know this, has been recanted. And we know that this whole idea of having macro and micronutrients and the importance of the macro ones, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, was changed many years ago. We recognized that there's way more going on here. So, for instance, if you're buying a fertilizer that says 20, 20, 20, 20% by weight, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and that's a very common fertilizer. And there's many fertilizers with higher numbers on them. When you apply them, they have a lot of unintended consequences to your soil nutrition. And very often that they actually reduce the plant available nutrients in your soil. They actually burn organic matter. If you look at a natural plant, typically that one test I saw on a plant, I can't remember what it was, but it said the plant by weight contained, I think it was 6% nitrogen, 1% phosphorus, and 4% potassium, or somewhere in there. So if you're putting a 20, 20, 20 or a 10, 52, 10 on that, where's the rest going? It's not helping your turf, it's not helping your trees, it's not helping the establishment of any plant in your landscape. A lot of it's leaching out and going into your water course, your groundwater, your water courses, or because of the way these synthetic fertilizers work, they're flooding the soil with hydrogen. And hydrogen is not a plant nutrient, but it has an affinity for the soil, and it will displace many, many other soil nutrients that are lessly well held on there. So these are definitely things to avoid. If you're looking for something, you probably don't want to go over, say, 5, 5, 5 or something like that. It's going to be much more in a range. And it sounds, doesn't sound logical, doesn't sound like the value's there, but that's plant available, and it's going to build your soil biology and not take away from it, basically making your lawn an addict. And all the research, this is in regards to trees. This is Dan Herms from Ohio State. I believe he's now the head research scientist for the Davy Tree Expert Company, which is very interesting. He'll be changing a few of the things they're probably looking at there. But he's talking about fertilization and insect resistance in woody plants. And there was no study that showed any increased resistance by fertilizing with synthetic fertilizers. And actually, and most of them showed the exact opposite. So that's a big cost input to a homeowner, is a very big cost in agriculture. Agriculture has hit a fork in the road where they're going organic on one side and not so much on the other. It's going to be interesting to see as our fertilizer prices go through the roof with the price of oil. Okay, now this stuff is all probably common to many of you and clear as far as logic. So these are common accepted industry practices. They're supported by landscape organizations and the industry. The first one is kind of obvious: baggy mowers and leaf blowers. We know there's going to be a constant reduction in organic matter unless we're replacing it. That's kind of an obvious one. Dethatching is also a common practice, particularly in the spring, but it's highly injurious to both your turf grass and the fungi that supports its health. If you have a lot of thatch, it's more of a management issue. You have a lot of lignin that's not getting broken down. Lignin's a building material like cellulose. And in grass, if you don't have the lignin feeding fungi populations in there, it's going to build up over time. So if you have thatch, that should be an indicator to you that you need to rethink the way you're managing your turf. Aeration, again, doesn't improve soil structure. Aeration is always talked about in the landscape industry as improving soil structure. It doesn't. Soil structure is biologically driven, which is soil structure being the pore spaces in your soil, the macro and micropores that hold oxygen, allow gas exchange, hold moisture, the movement of microbes, and the opening of spaces, and how all our soil aggregates or lumps fit together to make them function. Aeration by itself will not improve soil structure, but it's marketed as that. And I've seen lawns actually destroyed by aeration, where homeowners, in an effort to improve their turf quality, have aerated 3 times a year, done nothing else, and almost watched their lawns wash away. And of course, irrigation. Irrigation, it may be a necessity at times, but if you have a healthy soil with good organic matter, you have very high water holding capacity, which means less of a challenge in a drought, and quite possibly you can go without irrigation. So everything kind of connects. Your management practices may result in you needing irrigation. You're cutting your turf short, you're going to need irrigation. If you're using Kentucky bluegrass, you're going to need fertilization, probably synthetic, to keep it all in place. So all this stuff is easily adjusted, and in the end, actually, it can save you a lot of money, and the end result will be something you appreciate more. Okay, so to get back to this picture, this site that's got the soil compaction meter pushed right down to its handle, so it's at least 30 inches into the ground, almost a meter in the ground. The maintenance regime for this is just a high mower deck, no fertilizers, and that's it. So to anyone that thinks they have to do an awful lot to maintain a lawn, it's not true. Now you're going to say, what about that first picture that showed the sod with no topsoil under it getting rolled up, and comparing to this? Well, yes, there's going to be a transition period. You're not going to go from the one to the other like this, but this is the potential. It's the potential you can have, and you can imagine the benefit to your storm water, having a pervious surface like this, and being able to get the soil, the moisture down deep with deep roots, which means that your turf, and that's where your tree roots are going to do much better. So there are documents. This is a simple one that came out recently. It's Ontario based. It's from the Toronto Region Conservation Authority. Actually, if you look at a lot of things that Sol's talked about, and we've all presented on, you'd almost swear that they paraphrased it and put it in here. But there's certain things in here that are maybe income stream related. They did partner with Landscape Ontario, whose mandate is to support their members' fiscal well-being above all else. I'll just put it that way. So there's some things in here that maybe aren't beneficial, but this is definitely a first step to putting a document in the general public's hands. Okay, well, if you've been around Sol, you'll know about this, the Organic Land Care Standard for Canada. The neat thing about it, it's performance-based, it's not prescriptive. So it gives you an opportunity to manage your property, make management decisions on construction, design, construction, and then maintenance, and do it in a way that suits your property. It's not prescriptive. It doesn't say thou shalt do this or that. It allows you to make those decisions and provides you a very good guidance through that process, and what products may or may not be beneficial for you to decide. So it's on the website at Sol. And there are other guidance documents there. Organic Land Care for your community. That's there as well. It's great if you're interacting with your municipalities or your local green groups. if you want to get a handle on how to approach municipalities and other institutions on how to improve our land care system. Again, free on the SOL website. So just a case study, and I know we use this guy a lot, Rohan Harrison, bless him. And this is a big, massive institution. So you might say, well, how relevant is that to me in my yard, my home, my backyard, my front yard? Well, you saw some of those horrible pictures from the beginning of the presentation about what you might find in your soil. This is a massive healthcare campus. It's had enormous capital construction projects over the last 20 years. There's very little part of this that hasn't been enormously impacted by construction and possibly non-ideal landscape practices. They managed to turn this around in 10 or 12 years into a much healthier campus, and did it quite effectively, doing what you might even consider a minimal amount of work. It was just a case of being focused on what they were doing. Now, I'm not going to go through all these things, but there's a couple key points here. Is in the Toronto area, or might have been Ontario, I can't remember, back in 2005, we had legislation that came in that prevented any kind of landscape pesticides from being used. Oh, actually, it was maybe 2011. Sunnybrook did it earlier. Interesting enough, a lot of institutions were exempt from this, which is often the case. They just had to do a integrated plant management plan, which made the government happy for the time being, though they're starting to crack down on that. But basically, all synthetic fertilizer applications were stopped. Organic fertilizer was added, in this case, just the alfalfa, which is, as you can see, the numbers, 515 versus what we were talking about at 2020 or something like that. All landscape materials that were taken off-site ended up being composted. They used RTF grass, any area that needed to be top dressed, rhizomatous tall fescue, very deep rooting. Works well here in Ontario. I don't know about out west, but very, very beneficial. High mowing height, which is probably the number one thing when I speak to anybody about if they actually care about their turf and their trees. Ended up giving them a lot of financial benefits, reduction in mowing hours because the grass actually slowed down in its growth, better root system, reduced stormwater runoff, reduced weed populations and pest problems, increased pollinators, and visually a far healthier landscape. And this is a major cancer care center, so the outdoor appearance has very significant benefits to the people that are attending the place. So just a little example of what you can do. If you can do this with a massive high urban activity campus in 5 or 6 years, the difference, you can do this with your lawn, okay? This is the team that did it, just very dedicated, and they just stayed the course, and it's proven to be very effective. So when you're talking to any of your municipalities about their school boards or their right-of-way maintenance, boulevards, this sort of thing, it's all doable and at a cost savings. It's slow getting this message out. So I'm going to leave it there before we move on to the next section. Next section, we're going to talk about tree selection, planting and construction considerations. So more specifically about trees and less about turf. But hopefully we get enough time to answer questions from this. And if anybody had questions from that first presentation that we weren't able to deal with, hopefully we have time now.
Oh, that's fantastic, Chris. Thank you very much. And I guess I'm going to ask you to stop your screen sharing. And maybe you can put your video on. And I'll do the same. If you have questions, you can put them into the chat, or you can raise your hand and unmute yourself. And it would be wonderful to hear your voice. There is a question. How do you deal with the naysayers and proponents of the traditional protocols?
Oh, well, yeah, okay. I have a short answer for that. Well, actually, no, I don't have a short answer for that one. But I will say this. I think of that all the time, and I have come to phrase it in a term of what we call income streams. And the way research and knowledge seems to go is when a new idea comes along, if there's enough momentum or tipping point, it gets accepted, and there's change in the industry. And then over time, we learn to adjust to it and make our incomes and put our kids through college, etc. Then a new idea will come along that will say, well, maybe there's a better way of doing it. And the progressive folks will step up and say, yes, that makes sense. And then there's resistance in the industries that say, well, I'm quite happy. I don't want to make any change. This is what I do. I take my paycheck and I go home at 4 o'clock. And I'm quite happy with that. But eventually the tipping point comes. Now, the trouble is the people making decisions are planners, consulting engineers, that sort of thing. So, and this is where I focus a fair bit, is trying to deal with their perspectives, because this is what they learned when they got the degree. And if they weren't taught anything else, then it's a challenge. So for the rest of us, we all have degrees of some kind or another, probably, but it's what we learned in the 30 years since out there that has given us a different perspective. So anyhow, that's not, a great answer, but all you can do is keep showing them the benefits.
So you've touched on it. You've talked about the difference between beneficial practices, products, and just an accepted income stream. So you've alluded to that now in this answer too. Can you be more specific? What should we be suspect of in terms of accepted practices that are more related to income stream than beneficial practices for the trees, let's say?
Okay, so there's maybe two prongs here. One is professional associations. I'm a member of a number of them, but the number one mandate, as I mentioned, is to protect the well-being, the financial well-being of their members, is not to encourage change. A lot of them will put on a lot of educational programs and courses, but they're not overly receptive to things. Where the power comes from is if you can get a political aspect. Sometimes it takes something like a significant flood to motivate people, for instance. But there are the Insurance Bureau of Canada right now, for instance, is saying flooding is the number one payout, and they paid out more in the last, I don't know, couple years than they paid out in the 40 years they've been doing anything. This is huge. And now the Insurance Bureau of Canada is starting to direct policy for governments and municipalities. So they're starting to get the picture. We got municipalities now that have been sued, class action suits, for instance, for something such as flooding. So now it becomes a political issue. The politicians then will be asking their municipal engineers and whatnot. So what are we going to do about this? What changes are we going to make? And the engineers in the last 10 years have actually been basically throwing out a white flag saying, please help. They'll listen to anything. Now, it doesn't mean things happen fast because a lot of it's lip service, but I mean, we are reaching a tipping point. It's just a very slow process. I think that's about the best I can do with that answer.
Yeah, I know it's sensitive, and I thank you for that. A couple of people had to leave early. They've enjoyed your talk. Great talk, Chris. Have to run. So in one picture, because I was involved with Rohan when he started doing the transition period at Sunnybrook, I just wanted to bring up that when he planted new trees in lawns on Sunnybrook campus, he was applying mycorrhizal fungi to the tree roots, and they were young trees, generally between 4 and 5 feet. And then he started taking rooftop pictures throughout the months and then from year to year. And it was really obvious that the grass all around the tree circle of these new trees was doing better than the grass in the lawn. And so we were thinking that it must be simply the mycorrhizal fungi that were applied in planting the tree. Do you have any comments on that, Chris? We've never really talked about that, but it was really obvious from the rooftop pictures how the grass around the circle immediately, 4 inches, let's say, just on the outside of the tree circle, looked much healthier.
It would be interesting when that was happening. Just go back and do a little investigation, a little gentle digging around to see what was going on. Mycorrhizal fungi, there's no question of its benefits and its necessity. When we get into urban soils and new development, our soils are basically sterile, and they need to be re-inoculated one way or the other. Over time, it does seem to happen. There's a pretty big debate about mycorrhizal products, so commercially available. There's been some peer review of research in the States that says it's not effective. And up here in Canada, at the University of Guelph, we've been doing research on mycorrhizal fungi since the late 90s with showing definite benefits of it. So there's a discord in what's going on. Now, the products, I think, are different. If you're sticking with something that has been, I'm going to say, if you're going to go mycorrhiza, make sure it's a Canadian product, like Mike or Root Rescue. I think the spore content is high and viable. Having it properly put in and having it in contact with the tree roots, the new tree roots, you want to make sure they're exposed, because it's the root exudates that cause the spores to germinate in there. And in Canada here with these products, I don't think there's any question that it's not beneficial. In a perfect world, if you're planting trees or grasses in a certain area, newly to establish them, if you could have the opportunity to walk into a woodlot or a natural grassland and literally grab some soil detritus or duff up and use that as an inoculant, that would be great. But of course, that's not always feasible. So you need to get it in there. So anyhow, I would love to have been and a place where we could have gone and just kind of poked around with those
Yeah.
trees.
Yeah.
So here in Canada, it's yes to commercially available mycorrhiza products. In the US, not so much. I think they are prone to temperature storage issues, but I don't really see that as being a big problem because they go dormant in the soil. The soil gets frozen to minus 10 or 15 degrees naturally. So anyhow, so that's the state of it. I would say definitely go for it. It's a very small investment for a potentially a beneficial outcome.
Yeah, great, Chris. So I know that was bordering on next week's topic because you're going to talk about tree selection, planting, and construction considerations, right tree, right place, and that kind of thing, and then planting. So I jumped the gun there a little bit, but oh, you've just opened the door. I can't wait to ask more questions, but we're out of time today. So thank you all for coming. Thank you so much, Chris. The talks are recorded and we put them up on our website, the organiclandcare.ca website. And we're going to continue with urban trees in urban settings, part 3 next week. So thank you again, Chris, and wish you all a good week, everybody. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you so much.